Good morning, glampers. I slept okay last night. Wind was starting to pick up and flopping things around, so I'd wake up concerned that some of my tents were blown over, but everything seemed to survive the night. The forecast is for the wind to pick up to over 20 miles an hour though for the next day or two. So I'm definitely going to be battening down the hatches and making sure everything's set up to withstand the high winds. This is one of the reasons why I have plans to build some stronger structures as well as some wind-breaking structures. So I'm going to do a little bit more work on the golf cart today. Before I invest too much time and money in it, it's important to quickly diagnose what is wrong. And I want to start with the most expensive thing that could be wrong, which is a dead motor. If the motor's dead, that's probably about $500 for a new one, and they may not have even paid $500 for this golf cart. So if it's a dead motor, that's a good sign that this project should be set aside. There would be potential upgrades that could be done. It's a 36-volt motor, so if the motor's bad and the batteries are bad, kind of makes it a good candidate to upgrade to a 48-volt system. On the other hand, if you look at the cost of the batteries and the motor, you might find that you could buy a whole functioning 48-volt system used for less than the cost of those batteries and the motor. So that's one thing about these. There's so many of these golf carts, so many of these old golf carts too. I think this is probably an 80s model, that it's really easy to come by a used one cheap. So to eliminate as many variables as possible, I've disconnected all of the existing wires that were running to the motor, and I have just taken one of the cables that was used to connect two batteries together and bridged from the S1 terminal to the A2 terminal. And then over here, I have a freshly charged 12-volt deep cycle battery, and I'm just going to touch the leads to the A1 and S2 terminals here. So this is a serial DC motor. That's how it works. It's got field windings, it's got armatures, and depending on how you wire these things, you get forward and reverse. There's even some instructions on here, except they're got rubbed off, so you only have half the instructions available. But this is a pretty simple way to test them. I would do a different wiring if it was what's called a shunt motor or a parallel motor, but this is series, and that's going to be pretty common in golf carts. For shunt stuff is what you typically see in things that run at a fixed speed, like a washing machine or a lathe or something else. Maybe not a lathe, but a washing machine or other things. This configuration has a lot more startup torque and is definitely a better choice for golf carts. Now, I don't want this golf cart to run over my toes if it goes somewhere or run into something, so I've jacked it up. And I'm going to stay carefully out of the way in case it falls off the jack. I've got some leather gloves on here because I'm sure this is going to throw some sparks. If I had recently been charging a bunch of batteries, a bunch of lead acid batteries, they can throw off hydrogen gas and that could explode, but nothing's been charged around here, so I think I'm safe. If not, it will be a glorious end to this channel. So I'm going to things are also pretty rusty here. If I had more time, I'd find some wire brushes and clean these terminals up, but we're just going to go for it. All right, well, we saw sparks there, and I think you heard and maybe even saw the wheel turning. So we know we got a good motor. That is an excellent sign. That says that whatever is wrong in here is probably relatively cheap to fix. Some of these lead acid batteries that are in here probably have to be replaced because they were so discharged. But the rest of the system is pretty simple stuff. It's just some switches for the most part and some resistors, and there should be a lot of aftermarket parts available for it. So I think this project is definitely a go. Hopefully today you can see my head. The pieces have now successfully glued into the top, but they're sticking out too far. So I need to trim this down to be a nice flush fit. To do that, I'm going to try using this little tool, which I think is called the Stanley Sureform. So we can see that tool worked well for creating a nice flush surface here. Got a little bit more fine adjustment to do, but that did a nice job, much better than than what I've done when I've tried to cut it. However, it does make an awful lot of mess and dust. And so I think as a compromise, I'm probably going to do a rough cut to try to get the bulk of the material off, and then come back with the Surform to try to really flush and even it out. You can see that tears it up a lot more than what we had over here. That's fine. I got left enough material here that I'll be able to come back and put the Surform on that. Now, you can see this came out real well. It's nice and flush here. That took almost no time. And you might wonder, why didn't I use this tool before when I was cutting the wedges to put on the inside? And the answer is simply, I forgot that it exists and that I use it for this purpose. That definitely probably would have helped a lot when I was trying to shape the inside pieces, but what is done is done. There are a number of places where I need to fill gaps like these, and other places like under these eaves and on the inside. I'd like to have a nice fillet, because when I come and lay canvas over this, it's going to lay a lot nicer if this is a nice rounded corner here than if it's this abrupt, sharp angle. If I was doing standard epoxy and fiberglass work, then I would simply take a filler, perhaps this low density one, mix it with some epoxy to make some thickened epoxy, and then slap it into place. Then I could use popsicle sticks to put a fillet on it, or come back later for other types of repairs and sand things off to ferret. I'm still going to try the same sort of thing, and in fact I could use epoxy on this, but the cost of epoxy on what's supposed to be a cheap foam project is a little ridiculous. The epoxy is too strong and too expensive to warrant using it on the foam. It would work, it's just, you know, a lot of money for what's supposed to be a cheap project. So what I'm going to start by doing is trying and seeing what happens if I just mix the wood glue with a filler and see if it behaves in any way similar. And then I'm going to try perhaps a few other, I could try mixing with paint, or there's a few other things I could try mixing it with, and see if I can make something that behaves somewhat similar to thickened epoxy. Unlike epoxy, there's no real need to wear gloves, except I just don't want to deal with getting the glue off my hands later. It's not going to cause allergies or anything else. I do, from the low density filler stuff, though, need to wear some breathing protection, because if that stuff dusts up, I don't want to be breathing it. When mixing up epoxy and filler, the standard scale is based on food condiments. You start with your unthickened epoxy, and then you add a little bit of thickener to it, and you get what's called the ketchup stage. And then you add a little bit more, and you get to the mayonnaise stage, and you add a little bit more, and you get to the peanut butter stage. It's a somewhat arbitrary sounding standard, but it actually works pretty well in practice. For what I'm doing here, I'm definitely trying to get to something close to the peanut butter stage. I'm basically trying to fill in a large void, and I don't want it to be running out and gooping onto the floor while I'm gone. So I want something that's pretty stiff. Now I'm just using a little popsicle stick to squish the stuff into the void there. This is the same procedure that I would use if I was working with thickened epoxy. In fact, at this point in time, it's hard for me to even tell the difference between the two as I'm working with it. Definitely one of the issues that you run into in working with the thickened stuff is trying to get a nice smooth surface there. The smoother I can get it now, the less sanding that has to be done later. Fortunately, this is a filler that is relatively easy to sand. So I would say that the thickened Titebond 2 worked very similar in terms of putting it on and how it behaved as thickened epoxy. The question now is will it work just as well when it is dry? Is it actually going to dry overnight? Is it going to do anything funny? Am I going to be able to sand it? Is it actually going to bond to the foam? For all that, we got to come back tomorrow. It's getting to be late here, so I'm going to go eat dinner and see you tomorrow.